there, welcome back to an edition of Average Guys Doing Average Things. I'm SyrupDishes. So we like to talk about how we're just average guys. For example, we're going to show you epoxy pour river cutting boards, and I'm not a woodworker. I don't do it. It just looks like fun, something I want to give it a whirl on. And so we have edition one. It looks something like this that we're still working on. We're still trying to finish this out. But while this is going on, we're working on edition 2, which is another river pour epoxy cutting board. And the idea here is, well, we make mistakes on the first one, the second one gets better, the third one gets better, and so on and so forth. So we're just a step or two behind on our second one from this. I want to show you a video of how we correct the mistakes. If you didn't get a chance to see this one, kick over to that video, see how that went. Stay tuned. Let's watch how this river pour epoxy goes on try number 2. SyrupDishes, average guys doing average things. Just a regular old Joe Schmo. Hope you like it. Alright guys, so we've got two, a purple board, smaller, and then kind of a burgundy color, a little bit larger board. What we learned on our first go around, the blue board on cedar, was the planer ended up chipping the epoxy quite a bit. Took a lot of sanding, and so I want to show you here the router jig that I used to surface these boards instead of going to the planer. So my garage is a mess. I don't have a workshop. Again, I'm an average guy just doing something. So, you can do this too. Hopefully you make less of a mess than me. But let's check out this jig we made to surface these boards. So to make this jig to surface these, I first had 2 sawhorses. Now they're a little low for my taste, but you can use a tabletop or your own workbench. I don't have a great workbench space, so I bought those 2 sawhorses, pretty short, at Harbor Freight. They were $9 on sale. I placed underneath them 2 just studs. These happen to be 2x3 studs. Had them laying around. I want to show you over here because garages typically have drainage coming out. And so I just placed shims to help level those. Now I could screw it down, but it's just sitting on top of there right now. And you could do more. You could build a frame to sturdy it, to raise it up, whatever you want to do. And then I have my MDF or particle board, any way you want to go right here. It's just a pre-cut 2x4 sheet, bought at Home Depot. Altogether, that cost me $9. And then I have 2 levels. Now, these are just cheaper levels. They're 48 inches, so they fit directly across that particle board. And I use those shims just to make sure they were level on both sides. And I don't have my level on here now, but you need to make sure that it's level going across as well. And then I attached another piece of particle board and made a little frame to set the boards in. When I surface them, and you'll see those here in a little bit, they just fit right in there, and that kind of holds them steady. The next piece that you're going to need, let me show you how I put the levels on there. I just used some screw clamps to hold those on. Now I could use some in the middle, but I just have them kind of at the ends. But your next step is to build your jig. Now, some things I've done incorrectly here is this box is wider than my router is. And I really would like my router to be running on these sides. The other piece about this is these are up a little bit higher, and so the handles on my router sometimes bump into these if I'm trying to get low enough. But you either want to use a jigsaw, scroll saw, just to kind of route this out, or I actually just took my router and my bit that I use for surfacing, and I just ran it back and forth. So you just set your router in here, and I use a plunge router, and you just push it down so your bit just goes in there. I do have a 4-blade, 2-inch wide bit. There's a 1/2-inch shank that I put in there. On the ends of this, you want to make sure that it bumps up pretty close to your level here, because that jig can move back and forth. What's interesting is this doesn't really want to slide very good back and forth this way. So you want to go with the grain and really use it this way as you go through. Quick, easy jig that you can build. I'm probably into this for less than $30, depending on what you have laying around at home. If you have levels, if you have sawhorses, if you have clamps. But I mean, I'm not into this very much to build this. So let's watch some videos on how to surface these cutting boards. Remember, cut with the grain. You're about to see one of my larger cutting boards going against the grain to surface, and it burns the wood, sands out real easy, but watch close. So we just took the two boards we're working on. One's got burgundy, one purple, to the table saw. We ended up trimming those square after sanding the surfaces just so we could see where we were cutting and where we needed to cut. Now on the smaller board with purple, you could see we cut some chamfer edges in there as a little lip, and that's going to create some fun with us sanding. So we're going to come back and hit these with 60 grit. That's what we started with. We are going to work the wood all the way up to 220, and then we're going to work the epoxy to 2000 grit sandpaper before hitting it with the buffer and buffing compound to shine it up nice and pretty. When that's all done, we're going to coat it in mineral oil, and these are ready to go. They're really serving trays or charcuterie boards. You don't really want to cut on these a whole lot, but we've got some neat ideas for other boards. This is our second and third one, and things are going much smoother on this project than they did the first time. So let's watch a time lapse here of some sanding. Once you have that down to a 2000 grit on the epoxy, you want to hit it with the buffer. That epoxy will remain dull unless you buff those finer scratches out. Even if you coat it with something, it's still going to be dull. So get a good buffer, buff into it. And once you've done that, I've been adding these rubber feet. They're just stick-on. We'll see how long they last. This is to protect the bottom so it doesn't scrape on the counter if you are using it as a charcuterie board or otherwise. You will notice on this particular board, I used a half-round router bit to cut in some handles. That was a lot of fun on this project to be able to create those and put those in there. Really difficult to finish. Once you've done that, I'm adding mineral oil. It's a food-safe mineral oil to these to seal the wood. The wood will soak up and absorb that oil. The epoxy, not so much. So you want to leave a pretty good surface on there to coat and soak in, and maybe even apply an additional one after a few hours. Let that soak overnight. Don't wipe it off. Just allow that wood to seep and soak that in. Thank you so much for tuning in with us. We fixed quite a few of our mistakes, and although our edges still weren't square, by over pouring the epoxy, it fills in those edges, and the table saw just trims that right away. When originally we had chipping from the planer on the epoxy, switching to the router and surfacing these with the new jig made a world of difference. We did have some burnt edges or burning on top when we surfaced against the grain. That sanded right out, no problem, but we also took care of that by surfacing with the grain on the second one, and that was really helpful. Added some neat features, some chamfers to one of these, some handles to the other, and really these are popping. When you're mixing this epoxy, this particular pourable plastic was the brand. Keeping it at 71 to 73 degrees really did the trick in the cure. We really felt that went better. Got a lot better texture, a lot better color, more swirl designs in it, and just overall it looked a lot better this time around. So working with your epoxy, building these things does take some practice and time. We've got one more charcuterie board to build here, and then we're going to move on to something a little bit bigger, almost coffee table size. Watch for that video coming up. Thanks for joining SyrupDishes here. Average guys doing average things. Thanks, guys.